Now, I'm very pleased to be welcoming on stage our moderator for this segment. He is Mr. Michael Poon, the Deputy Chairman of National Maritime Safety at Sea Council. And we're also very pleased to have with us, oh yes, clap please, Singapore, and the Executive Director of Singapore Shipping Association. So I make my way this way. And also in just a while, right now I'll be introducing the panelists to join us on stage. Pleased to invite Ms. Kwa Lei Hoon, the Chief Executive of MPA, to join us. And we'd like to welcome Dato H.J. Baharin bin Dato Abdul Hamid, the Director General of Marine Department Malaysia, as well, to join us on stage. Captain Andre L. Lagovin, the President of the Nautical Institute, join us on stage. We're welcoming Ms. Carolyn Yang, the Vice Chair of International Chamber of Shipping and President of Singapore Shipping Association. Along with that, Mr. Andreas Brackel, the Vice President of Head of Environmental Claims, Guardian Committee member, IGP&I Group. Welcome on stage. We have a final member of the panel who'll be dialing in remotely. He is Mr. Arif Toha, the Director General of Sea Transportation, Ministry of Transport, Indonesia. Let's give him a while and make sure that he's online. So I'd like to say a big hello to Mr. Toha. If you can hear us, please say hello.
Hello. Everyone.
There he is online. Thank you. So our panel is ready. I'm going to be handing over time to Ms. Michael to moderate this. Thank you. Over to you.
All right, thank you very much. First of all, everyone, a warm welcome to this panel. I have the unenviable task of moderating a very distinguished panel. In fact, quite a big number for the moment. And also including Pak Arif, if you can hear me, thank you very much for joining us virtually on this call. I know that your time is precious, but we do appreciate your presence at this point in time. So I think to start off with, I just want to do a quick summary because I really like the fact that first of all, I think Minister is not here right now, but I was really inspired by his opening speech. I think everyone have heard the main points that he talked about, which I thought was really good to listen to. And as a Singaporean, I'm pretty proud of the fact that Singapore is pretty much investing in the future. Unheard of, right? We are looking towards 2025, where 5G will be the normal way of how we transport and also put in place and relay data. That's going to be key for all of us. And I'm also surprised, Lei Hoon, thank you very much for your leadership as well and for the community. We're also seeing exciting landscape ahead of us, automated anchorage management system. I've never heard of it before. And then as an executive director of the Singapore Shipping Association, we're always tasked with complaints and constructive feedback on how we can better manage this limited anchorage space we have in Singapore itself. So really very exciting to hear that. Obviously, I think and I feel for and I do relate and resonate with Senior Minister Chee is that he says, while technology is a tool, it is important for us to continue to press on collectively as a whole to build a safety culture. Sister Mary from the Union, I think you know that. I saw you nodding very aggressively. I think we understand it very well. Dr. Dagim, thank you so much. You definitely have highlighted as what Mr. Orbeck Nelson has mentioned before. I think the 2 years of pandemic have really brought a pronounced state of awareness of how we actually treat seafarers, how we treat them. And it's important for us because I think I just heard Mr. Orbeck Nelson mention about the fact that how we treat them really impacts the future of maritime talent here. If we treat them well, we will get an assured pool of future maritime talent. If we don't treat them well, then I think the industry will be in for the long haul to find the right people that's going to be in place to take us moving forward. And more so from an industry where we are really transporting the world's goods, 90% of them, for the world's economy. I think that's going to be key for all of us. So it's important for us to understand that, and I'm going to be engaging the panel with us. Pak Arif, I hope you can hear me very clearly, that we can maybe discuss this at great length in a short while. But there is really a reinforced call to make sure that standards, certification, including training, should always be in place. And in particular, I like the fact that Mr. Orbeck Nelson talked about a few things, which is really about the future as well, right? Who would have thought that a few years back that we would have to link decarbonization with safety, right? Who would have thought about that? And perhaps I'm going to look forward to our Vice Chairman from ICS, Ms. Caroline, to maybe talk about it in a short while on this about decarbonization. I'm sure from your viewpoint at ICS, there's also a worldwide view on how we can actually put this in place. Last but not least, Mr. Obek Nelson talked about a few things, which he says that there is a tectonic shift towards what the shipping industry is facing. I think we all agree about this, right? There's so many waves of regulations we've got to deal with. With the impending decarbonization agenda, it's going to be key for all of us. So I think with that, I want to maybe start off perhaps with Ms. Kwan, since you're close to me, because Mr. Obek Nelson talked about a couple of things. He said that in his speech, he said that collaboration is the real fuel of the future. But I also think that collaboration is going to be the real driving factor in safety culture. So actually, how does, in your viewpoint, because I've heard you before, you've mentioned the fact that there was indeed, on the safety aspect and training purposes, MPA did sign an MOU with Indonesia, DGST, in regards to training. Can you please elaborate more about this for us?
Well, Pak Arif, who is with us, I'm sure he will also be able to share that. I think the thing about training, right, is that the challenges that we face within the maritime sector is really not a country's problem nor a company's problem. When we talk about decarbonization, digitalization, and Knut has rightly pointed out in terms of the future fuel, you will see that there's going to be drastic change in the next 10 years, 20 years, and 2050 is going to be a totally different picture from today. When it comes to safety, vessel traffic management, when it comes to anchorage management, when it comes to safety at sea out there, when it comes to piracy issues, and I know Natarajan ED of Recap is here today, these are areas which requires a lot of collaboration because it is not just within one country, it's also cross-border. And when it comes to training, collaboration with our neighbors, whether it's with Malaysia or with Indonesia, it is even more important because we are the 3 littoral states of the Straits of Malacca and Singapore. So with DG, Pak Arif here, the establishment of the collaboration of training has been especially for many years from now, even before my time, with my predecessors, about how do we bring about improved safety standards along the Straits of Malacca and Singapore, and how do we exchange views in terms of some of the training, in some of the roles and the regulatory functions that we have in this area. But I just want to highlight another important point about collaboration. In fact, when I first joined the sector 3.5 years ago, a veteran told me, shipping, port, you will never see collaboration. It is only competition. And look at where we are today. 3.5 years into now, with the pandemic, we've saw so much transformation and changes, and I actually only see collaboration. Of course, there's competition, but how do you collaborate? Like what Michael, you mentioned, how do you collaborate on standards, on governance? Because if we don't collaborate, we'll never find global solution and will always remain as it is in the shipping sector, and your supply chain will always be disrupted, even in normal situation. So I think for me, collaboration is really key, and I hope that the shipping veteran who told me that 3.5 years ago would now come forward, and I will update him on all the measures we are doing in collaborating together, not just within the region, but also with IMO, multilaterally, and also not just within shipping, but across the value chain, logistics sector, fuel, energy companies. So yeah, that would be my...
I think, Leon, thank you very much. I think it's not only just across the logistics chain, but also across the region as well, right? This being an International Safety at Sea Week, we're definitely looking forward to collaborate across the entire globe at the same time. So to keep Ms. Pak Arif warm, while he's on the virtual side of the house, Pak Arif, it would be nice to hear your views in regards to where do you see this collaboration that's taking place in terms of Indonesia? And as you know, Indonesia Crew is a big cruise supplier for the shipping industry itself. So where do you see that that it will take place where training will be important for us, and that it will also help to improve the safety culture across the board where the crews are serving around the world today? Pak Arif, up to you, please. Thank you.
Yes. COVID-19 pandemic has a significant impact to the safety aspect of the maritime transport, especially to seafarers as a key factor of ship seaworthiness. Restriction in the process of crew replacement will cause a stranded seafarer who will experience excessive fatigue. In its latest circular, IMO circular regarding the coronavirus, designation of seafarers as key workers, IMO urged member states and relevant national authorities to designate seafarers as key workers providing an essential service in order to facilitate safe and unhindered movement for crew and maritime workers on the process of signing in and out to or from vessels. Crew change facilitation has come in the spotlight of the Indonesia DGST. Indonesia authorities implement relevant measures to allow stranded seafarers to be repatriated and others to join the ships, and to ensure access to medical care as well as other urgent needs. What we did, for instance, is in 2021, we provide 11 ports in Indonesia for the repatriation and or crew change activities. There are in Belawan, Tanjung Balai Karimun, Batam, Merak, Tanjung Priok, Tanjung Perak, Makassar, Bitung, Ambon, Benoa, and Sorong. And in 2022, the number is increasing since all ports now available for crew change and repatriation. From January 2021 up to May 2022, Indonesia assisted crew change and repatriation of more than 5,600 seafarers. In the event of medical assistance and handling of crew change activities for the ship's crew of Indonesian citizens and foreign nationalities will carry out in accordance with the established regulation and WHO health protocols. Moreover, on these matters, Directorate General of Sea Transportation released some circulars. The first was circular letter number 11, year 2020, on contingency plan for seafarers and ship owners or operators due to COVID-19 to address the validity period of seafarers documentation matters, followed by circular number 13, year 2020, concerning passengers limitation on ships, transport and port services during the emergency of coronavirus disaster management 2019. We keep this circular update, and we also communicate with the IMO so that maritime community are aware of the facilitation. The latest one is the circular letter number 83, year 2022, on the guidance for people's domestic travel using sea transportation modes during the coronavirus disease 2019. And it was issued recently on 26 August 2022. That's my...
Parif, thank you very much. I think it's really very pleasing and comforting to hear that DGST has put in place a lot of policies that to help and aid in the repatriation of obviously, of course, Indonesian seafarers. We are really definitely very pleased to hear that. While the Indonesian authorities are doing that in terms of making sure that repatriation is going to be very critical, we've seen it happen in the pandemic period of time. I think the alleviation of the well-being and the welfare of crew, it's important. So, Andreas, we talked about this in regards to alleviation of the welfare. Can you share with us, how do you see that the well-being of the crew is connected to the prevention of accidents? You've heard Pak Arif talked about, how they're making efforts to enable repatriation and so on. So can you share with us, how do you see that well-being of a crew is connected to the prevention of accidents? Andreas.
The short answer is that there's a strong correlation between the wellness of the crew and the number of accidents. So whatever we can do to make sure that the crew are well, the more effective, efficient our efforts to minimize these accidents will be. A mistake is often being committed by a crew member. But it is also often provoked by the environment in which the crew member lives and works. So having a focus on the environment of which the crew members are living out at sea, are working out at sea, and their social relations on board I believe can be a strong contributor to avoid accidents going forward.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that, because you said that the environment also provokes the well-being. The environment that they work in also, in a way, impacts a crew's performance. Now, since we talk about that, I'd like to maybe shift gear a little bit more, because if you heard before, the tectonic shift of the future is that the ships are moving towards a new carbon-friendly future. So therefore, we're expecting that the operating profile of a ship now will move towards much more high-tech world, a much more different world in how we actually mix the fuel. Or back to Nielsen talk about the fact that we are seeing likely some risks involved.
Yes.
And the risk could include engine failure if you look at slow steaming. It could involve the wrong mixture when you're entering the port, particularly if you're going to an E-car area, and so on. So I think that's going to be key for us. It's interesting you talk about that. And maybe perhaps I would maybe ask Caroline, if you can, tell us a few things, because given today's world, the industry is constantly being stretched to the limit, right? With the multitude of compliance, with the multitude of regulatory requirements from the IMO. Digitalization and technology may be or must be the solution, right? So where do you see digitalization and technology impact shipping as a whole?
So, you can see from the pandemic that it was the digital tools that kept the economy going and the businesses going. So definitely when we talk about automation, we talk about digitalization, it is all about improvement of, and it can improve shipping. It can streamline the operations. It can improve the operations. You can have route optimization. You can also even have a clearer idea, but you can have a clearer calculation of our carbon emissions from our ships. So definitely digitalization is the way to go. Digital tools is the way to go. And it goes for anything from the current digital tools, we have the AI, as well as the digital twins that we see it happening right now. But I have a few things that I want to bring up is, when we talk about digitalization, there are actually a lot of factors that we need to take into account. I think the first factor I see is legislation. Legislation is going to be very key, because we need a very strong, coherent infrastructure of legal framework to govern this digitalization if we want to be truly globally connected. And the governments need to collaborate on technology standards and policies so that we can have a truly globally connected supply chain. That's one factor. Now, the second factor, we talk about collaboration. So collaboration and interoperability of systems. It has to happen throughout the whole maritime ecosystem. We talk about ship owners, terminals, charterers, banks, customers, just to name a few. All of them needs to talk to each other. So this collaboration and interoperability is important. You cannot have the smartest technology on board and you can't interlink with the port that you are entering. Yeah, so that interoperability is important. Then when you have the multitude of systems, then we talk about the safety and the security of these systems. So we also must develop a strong frame, it's not a framework, we need to have a strong infrastructure of this safety and security embedded into all these systems so that all these solutions can operate and talk to each other. So these are, you talk about legislation, you talk about collaboration and interoperability, then you talk about the the safety and security of the infrastructure of the different systems. Now, when we develop all these solutions, we must have our seafarers and the maritime workers as our focus. They must be our left, right, and center of the solutions that we devise. And one of the main guiding principles is that it must decrease workload. If it increases workload, please don't do it. Yeah, very simple. Now, the last thing that I want to talk is just transition. Because many of our seafarers and maritime workers come from the developing countries. So we need to upskill them. We need to give them the skills to be able to handle this very digital, very automated, and going to be a very confusing, multi-fuel pathways of dealing with the engine. So we need to upskill them. And then we need to provide the financial support to the developing countries so that they can come along with us and be automated as well. Thank you.
Caroline, it's very interesting you talk about this because you talk about this just-in-time skills and how we need to make sure that crew must be really skilled for the right things at the right time. And I think it brought to mind and reminded me of a discussion that I had, I think, with Captain Andre or with Andreas. And I would like for you to maybe perhaps share with the audience on that episode that you had in regards to this little alarm that went on in an ECDIS, which became a fatigue. Maybe I'll leave it to Captain Andre to maybe share this and maybe tell us the impact of how perhaps sometimes even with the right skill and the right time to do it, sometimes technology also fails us and also the behavior of the crew also fails us in a manner.
Yes, that was an interesting situation. I was on board a vessel. The weather wasn't good, and we were together with another ship working cargo during an STS. And the ECDIS, well, let me just backtrack just a little bit because I happened to be up all night on that vessel, tending the ropes, keeping an eye on everything, making sure. The conditions were satisfactory. We could go ahead with the operation, but it just required my full attendance. And I was on the bridge, and they had one ECDIS unit, and it was constantly in alarm. And that was okay at first. But as the night wore on, and I was getting more and more tired, and sleep was not a possibility, and I'm listening to this bleating. So I said to the second mate, who happened to be up on watch with me, could you just please cancel the alarm? And his reply to me was, what alarm, sir? I said, the alarm that's going off on the ECDIS. Oh, yes, that's always going. Okay, does that not concern you? And the honest answer was no, it didn't concern him. And I said, well, what is it? He says, I'm not sure. It's probably a target that's been auto-acquired and it's moved far enough away now that the ECDIS has lost it. They've lost the signal and it's gone into alarm. I said, probably. And again, he looked at me and he said, yes, that's probably what it is. But I said, it could be something really, really important, yes, couldn't it? And he said, well, yes, but he said, I expect it's a target that's fallen off. We left it at that, but that ECDIS was in alarm for the duration of my time on the bridge. And that isn't the first one that I've come across. We have the technology there, we have the capability there, but it's just, at times, dare I say, too clever. There's too much involved in it. And it's acquiring these targets and then losing them, and it's generating alarm. And there must be some differentiation between the two, because you're going to get a serious alarm on that ECDIS, and it's going to be ignored.
So do you see this as mental fatigue for the fact that it's, constantly, it's like a constant drone and a hum that you tend to just ignore it, right?
Yes, it was certainly mental fatigue for me.
Yeah.
Because an alarm going off on a unit means there's something wrong. Alarms are important.
Absolutely.
But we must look at what we actually alarm. And it is mental fatigue. One shuts out something that one doesn't want to hear.
Yeah.
We're all capable of that to lesser and greater degrees. I think any of us who've sailed at sea for any length of time has seen the phenomena of radar blindness,
Yeah.
where a target appears, particularly with a junior officer, and they really don't want that target to be there. So they mentally get rid of it.
Obviously. So it's almost an alarm for no cause for an alarm.
Yes, but 99% of the time, the reason is.
Yes.
So I think I'm pretty safe to ignore it. And I can't do anything about it because that means the machine's going to alarm every time the target goes out of a range, a set range, and you can't change the parameters. They're factory set. That was my understanding of it. The trouble is there's so many ECDIS. I think we have something like between 32 and 36 different models. So I can't do anything about it, nor would I as a pilot on board. But no, when it's a great concern when you see something like that being ignored.
All right. Caroline, you were going to...
Yeah, so I wanted to add in because I feel that training is key. You really need to give that competence to your crew. And I shared this incident because I'm going to share an example because it's very fresh in my mind. So recently we took a group of vessels to our ownership. We bought a fleet of 5 tankers, and they are the sisters vessels, and there's a lot of electronics and 2-stroke engines, but electronics, and my crew is mostly 4-stroke engines. So, and I visit my ships. So, and I visited one, and it was just as we took over, and you could see that my chief engineer was a bit frightened of handling the engines. And I was frightened because he was frightened. You know, I was worried, and we immediately got some training done for him when I went back to the office. And then 2-3 months later, I went to another ship, same sister vessel. And so I spoke, and I only just went 2 days ago, and I spoke to the chief engineer. I say, so how are you doing? He said, ma'am, it's good. I've been trained. I went for the training is WinGD. I went for WinGD training. I spent 5 days in the training center together with the superintendents. And then the second engineer was an ex-engineer on this vessel with the previous owner. So he said, the second engineer is helping me. And then I have an electrical engineer on board who is not worried about electronics. So you see the stark difference between the two ships. And I really feel that it's all about upskilling them and giving them the confidence not to be afraid. So you need to upskill your crew.
Caroline, thank you for sharing that. I think it's really important to really understand that, and we are very pleased to hear you as a very responsible ship owner to make sure that skills are constantly, training is constantly being part of that ongoing skills for your crew. That's really an inspiration, I think, for all ship owners to follow at the same time. But I want to switch gear a little bit more because Captain Andre, you earlier talked about, this whole fatigue thing, and we heard Pak Arif earlier mention that Indonesia is doing their best to make sure in the times of pandemic that, all the crews that are on board, I know we heard about it before, globally there were more than, was it 1 million or so? 1 million seafarers that were stranded. Obviously they were overworked. Parts of the contract were also expiring, but we couldn't get them off the ship because certain ports were not able to actually allow it to happen. So I want to talk to maybe perhaps Dr. Baharin, so you want to talk about this. I know that you mentioned before, but I think regarding the global statistics during COVID-19 pandemic itself, more than 1 million seafarers were on board ships at any given point in time, right? Replacing crew and repatriation were very difficult times. How do you perceive the situation in the case of Malaysian crew and ports? If you can share that with us.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Okay, shipping is key to Malaysia because Malaysia is basically a trading nation, and then shipping transports about 90% of what we, what we trade in. So in relation to that, with shipping, therefore, the crews of the ships are very important for the transportation of these goods to be carried out safely and efficiently. So this we recognize. But what happened during the pandemic was, if I may recall that it was in March 2020 where we declared the lockdown in Malaysia. And at that time, it was quite chaotic because we didn't actually know what to do in Malaysia on how to counter the effects of the pandemic vis-a-vis the shipping industry. At that time, the government decided that the Ministry of Health was the agency to counter the COVID-19 pandemic. We had this law, which we call it the Act 342, which is actually the Prevention of Communicable Diseases Act in Malaysia. And in that act, it is stipulated that shipping, waterborne transport is an essential service. So due to that, we went to the ministry, and the government decided that for the shipping industry to carry on its activities, therefore that the Marine Department is the key agency to decide to develop the procedures for the crew change and the repatriation of crews from ships. So in that instant, of course, we were doing it on like a trial basis, on what can I say, on we didn't know what to do actually. So at first we decided that okay, because if you remember at that time there was this fear of cruise ships coming in with the pandemic. The cases where there was this case in Japan where the cruise ship was infected with the passengers and the crew with the COVID-19 virus. So at first thought, okay, then we decided that, okay, how do we deal with crew change from ships? At first, we, in the middle of 2020, we decided that, okay, that we prohibit cruise ships from coming into the country, and that we only deal with crew change from Malaysians only. And of course, and we designate certain ports for the crew change, and in Peninsular Malaysia, we designated the port of Lingi as the crew change port. But that actually didn't work, because we had a lot of pressure from ships coming in to do the crew change, and we realized that if we do not arrest the situation, then there will be, as what was pointed out, that there would be a lot of cases where there would be mental stress issues on crews on board the ship. I can recall one case which happened where one crew of a ship transiting the Straits of Malacca actually jumped overboard the ship. And he was rescued by our Maritime Enforcement Agency and brought to the port, Batu Pahat. And he was placed in a hotel for him to recuperate. But that night, the day when he arrived, that night itself, he jumped from the hotel and met his death, and he actually committed suicide. So from there, we realized that this is what do you call it? This is not a matter for us to be playing with. It is something which is very serious, and we had to do something about it. So in the end, we decided that, okay, we would open all the ports in Malaysia for crew change, albeit we work together with the immigration and the health authorities. And gradually, we issued circulars, our Malaysian shipping notices. We issued we gradually open up for full crew change for the vessels in all our ports, to the point now that we have recently just issued another shipping notice, which actually does not restrict anymore crew change, where we do not even need the vaccination protocols for the crew to be sign on or sign off aboard the ship.
Yeah.
So that is the latest circular, and we have actually opened up to all our ports, and we are also now allowing crews on ships coming into ports for their shore leave. So
Wonderful.
these are some of the what I can say, the how we develop the processes and the procedures for crew change. Thank you, Michael.
Dato, thank you so much. I think your sharing has been really apt, because I saw on the Pigeonhole, and by the way, the audience listening in and also the people that are here, if you've got dying, burning questions to ask, please key it into the Pigeonhole. We'll pick it up from you. But as I was saying earlier on, I think Dato, your sharing has been really good, because it actually helped me to actually answer two questions that was already posted on the Pigeonhole, and one was, shore leave is definitely important for crew. It's an important aspect of mental health. And obviously, I think collaboration will be key for all of us. It would be great, and it's good to listen from the authorities concerned that policies are right now in place to encourage and also support shore leave. And it's also very encouraging to hear, even from Pak Arif online, that Indonesia, the littoral states, Singapore as well, and Malaysia, that you are already putting in place policies that also allow for an easing of crew change to take place without all these restrictions that was in place during the pandemic itself. Now, I think just what I would like to do is perhaps I can ask the support people if you can put out the pre-session questions that was put out to the attendees, and to show the pie chart of the responses in regards to what they see are challenges in the crew change portion. So can we have the system and the people to reflect that pie chart, please? Yeah, very good. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see on the screen, it says here, which do you see as the hardest wave to ride in terms of its impact on maritime safety? And if you look at the screen itself, I think overwhelmingly, the human element is going to be very key for us. Training, health and well-being, which I think the panel is talking about today as well. But the great portion, the mindset change for good safety culture is just as important. But what I do find very, very much of a surprise for me is that 12%, which is a small pie that talks about COVID-19 and disease X, is being placed as minor. But to me, it's not minor, because I think COVID-19 taught all of us a lesson. We have never realized that something that seemed to be minor in the first place, you all would recall in 2020, is just another infection that is another part of the region of the world, but it quickly overwhelmed and took all of us by surprise. And I think that the question that was being asked is that what measures are in place to avoid a repeat of the crisis that crew faced during the pandemic when they were stranded on board, because we need to be prepared for the future. So maybe perhaps can I ask Lei Hun, you were in the front line in the trenches with me when we battled that, so I think perhaps I can get your viewpoint on what do you think would be perhaps the view moving forward for port administrators to really look at to address unforeseen pandemics like this.
So I'd just like to share three C's here. Of course, not cash, condo, nor credit card, nor COVID. The three C's here is this. I think if we want to give confidence to our seafarers, there are three C's here. First is, what do we do during crisis? To be able to assure them that even in times of crisis, you are being taken care of. I mean, Dato' Baharudin has spoken about crew change, and here in the room, we have gone through that period of the past 3 years, I must say it's really darn difficult, okay, from a port authority's point of view. But the tripartism that we had in Singapore, the fact that we had such good feedback from the industry players, we've got Michael and Caroline from the Singapore shipping industry telling us and giving us feedback on how to improve the process moving forward. We've got our unions, who is able to also bring back some of the best practices that they have heard. And actually together when we sat around the table, of course we banged table, we throw stones, we throw water at each other. But at the end of it, what we did was we sat together and we came up with a protocol that can work not just to ensure that port efficiency continues, but to ensure that at least what our Ministry of Health is concerned about in terms of public health risk is taken care of. So we came up with a crew change safe corridor. And on top of that, we started to prioritize vaccination of our local seafarers, our maritime workers, to assure that all ships coming on our port are dealing with vaccinated maritime workers. So, and then subsequently we went into CVAX, of course. So I think what we do in crisis is very important to assure our seafarers that even in time of crisis, whether it's about medevac, helicopter evacuation, whether it's about, I'm sorry to say about that, but whether it's about offloading of deceased from the ships. All these play a very important role because having one deceased on board the vessel, and we have to deal with a lot in Singapore during that period. The mental stress on the seafarers who are alive and together with us and continue to work, it is a very high mental stress. So the first C is crisis. What do we do during crisis? And I would say that in the past 3 years, and I know from working with our Indonesian Pak Arif and Dato' Baharin, at least in this part of the world, we have done our best. And in Singapore, being a global hub port, we have done our best, working with the different partners. And actually till now, I would say that we have done more than 320 crew changes. Similarly, vaccinated, unvaccinated, shore leave, all this is already all relaxed. So actually it's not a problem. Problem now is our ships not all our ships are allowing their crew to come down for shore leave. So I would urge all of you, whoever has authority and decision out there, let your crew come down for shore leave. We need to relaunch our economy also anyway, so it's a win-win for you and for us. The second C is really the confidence, and that I echo the point that Caroline mentioned. The confidence actually now with our seafarers is two things. First is we are going into digitalization, we are going to decarbonization. Actually, what does it mean to my job? Do you still need me? And secondly, do I have the competency to meet with the future demands? We have heard from a lot of shipping companies that there is a shortage of crew, onshore and offshore, who are able to handle LNG vessels. And you know that not all the new builds, most of the new builds nowadays are dual fuel. And they will be able to run on LNG when the prices go down after this situation. So what can we do to enhance the competency? And we need to start with future competencies, whether it's future energy. So for example, if you can go into ammonia bunkering in Singapore, what do we do? What is the type of competency we can work with our Center of Excellences, with our unions, with our shipping industry associations, to be able to churn and teach? What are the curriculum we can come up with to teach them, so that at least they feel more equipped that, in 2 or 3 years' time, I am ready for it. And we need to start doing it now. And lastly, is really the culture. Culture is very important because culture on board the vessels, there are traditional culture, that's the more open culture, depending on which country and which type of owners you have on board the vessels. And we've heard a range of them. So you could keep to the very conservative traditional type. And for example, in the past, nobody uses handphones, so everybody are forced to mingle. Now, what we heard about culture now is everybody has a handphone. It's good and bad, right? But it's bad because they're all stuck in the room now. And actually, your captains are facing with problems. How do we deal with our seafarers who are not talking to each other? So one culture that I heard on board was that they basically literally forced, during this period and this period, all your handphones the captain will keep in his room, and the seafarers have to go out, no choice. So they have a mandatory 2 hours out, where they mingle with each other. So is that the culture you want to set for a company? Then the culture of how do you handle with sexual harassment? That's an important issue, because we've heard of some in the past where maybe if there's a sort of like a complaint from a female cadet, you'll be like, okay, maybe blah, 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 and then we'll just give the captain a warning. But recently I've heard from another shipping company who tells me, if that is the case, even if they don't investigate, they will ask the captain to perhaps at the next port of call, just come down and have a change. So I think the question is the culture. So for me, it's 3 things: what we do during crisis, what is the type of confidence we can give to our seafarers in terms of future competency, and the third is the type of culture. And there are a lot of studies now, including in Singapore, some of the companies I've heard, who are doing pedagogy on what is it that you can do, for example, on online training, remote training to your captains, on how you can manage on board the vessels with diversity, with the type of situation that you can arise, and also, you know, new types, new generations going on board, new challenges, new demands. How do you cope with that? So 3 C's for me.
Thank you, Leon, for sharing that 3 C's. It's really refreshing to hear that you've put it very nicely in that 3 little mini compartments in the area. So I want to maybe talk about confidence, because Caroline actually gave a really good example about, you know, the difference between the crew in that little bunker barge. But I feel that it's really a nice nugget to talk about, and also the fact that, as you had mentioned early on, we move into an era now that we will not turn back, and that is the usage of new fuels. And it's going to be an advent of a new era now about how we look at that. Andreas, the question I'm going to ask you is that, what in your viewpoint, what are the safety aspects that you see are related to the shift towards fossil-free fuels?
Well, it is not as much as it is now the concern for the marine environment. I think the change from fossil fuels will cause less, over time, less damage to the marine environment. What is my main concern at this point are the safety aspects for all the people involved with these fuels. At least in the beginning, when new technology, you mentioned it, when new technology is being introduced, then mishaps will happen. Engines will break down, we will have blackouts, and we are going to see some accidents, groundings, collisions. And the question is then, how will the crew be able to protect themselves?
Right.
When we have toxic fumes from ammonia or methanol leaking out, will they be able to protect themselves when either trying to fix the problem or trying to evacuate the vessel? How will salvors handle a casualty when they themselves will put themselves in danger of getting close to a grounded vessel with all these fumes surrounding them? How will authorities handle it? Will it be the sort of instinctive, not in my backyard approach, or will the authorities also manage to create disaster plans specifically allocated to the fuel in question in order to take care of it properly? I really hope we will manage to do this, but we will need to collaborate. So again, this is the fuel of tomorrow, collaboration. All the stakeholders need to collaborate. From the very beginning, the crew members will need to tell the authorities or tell their ship owners, who will then tell the insurer that we have a problem. Our engine is not working properly. We need to get that communication going as early as possible in order for the insurers to arrange with salvors, in order to let the authorities know, so that the authorities can do the right thing and actually do something about the problem before it gets too dangerous.
Right, right. And we actually never thought about that, right, in case there's an accident that will take place. Caroline, coming to you, you know, sometime in May 2022 this year, ICS published a report, and the report was called Fueling the Fourth Propulsion Revolution. And that actually kind of showcased why maritime industry must be included in all of this international decarbonization plans. Can you elaborate more, maybe share with the audience, you know, what does it really mean? What are the insights that ICS has shared in terms of future fuels and safety culture for the seafarers?
So ICS published quite a few reports. One of this report is propelling the fourth propulsion. And and it talked about the different fuels that they believe is coming up, and that we need to equip our seafarers for these fuels. And actually, they want to, following from this, they actually want to, in COP26, in conjunction with the UN Global Compact as well as ITF, if I'm not mistaken, they came up with this Maritime Just Transition Task Force. And it was the intention that they want to make sure that, because most of our seafarers come from developing countries, they want our seafarers to be equipped to deal with these new fields of the future. So that is COP26, that is last November. And in this November 22, they will come up with a report, and they will come up with a list of skills that the seafarers will need to be equipped to deal with all these fields of the future. That's one. Number two, they're going to quantify the number of seafarers that need to be skilled. So these are the two main points that they're going to do. And hopefully with this report, they hope that governments will use this as to feed into the creation of their policies, as well as guidelines for companies in their decision making.
Caroline, I think it's very critical to really make sure that the industry understand that very clearly, because you're talking about a list of critical skills that's going to be required, and it's going to be very comprehensive. Pak Arif, given the fact that Indonesia is also quite a major cruise supply nation, in your opinion, we talked about and we discussed about the safety element involved, the crew change crisis, how we have to support it. But I think importantly, in your opinion, can you share with us, we know there are many waves that are taking place, but which waves are the most difficult to ride in terms of the crew impact on maritime safety itself? Can I have your viewpoints, Pak Arif?
Yes, in previous experience, there are many factors that affect the aspect of the safety at sea. Of the factors that plays a very big role is the human element, where the supply of crew must be ensured to be available with adequate qualification and training, as well as the good health and good mental conditions and well-being. This is to ensure that each crew members can carry out their duties optimally on the ships. However, along with the emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic, several challenges must be faced, including the decreased availability of crew members due to limited crew change locations and restriction on travel between countries. Also, limited education and training for seafarers and ship crews due to the pandemic situations that does not allow physical meetings, while distance teaching is still not familiar for them. A strict rule to ensure that the crew who will board and disembark are in good health, one of which is through the quarantine procedure for a certain period. Seafarers are at the heart of shipping operation, and it is essential that the industry makes flexible arrangement to existing the ship management structures. Seafarers have encountered extraordinary circumstances during the past few years and need to be supported as a priority both today and into the future. Therefore, to answer one from the challenges, Indonesia has held several free COVID-19 vaccination program for sea transportation service officers in 2021 to support the port and sea transportation service activities, both logistic and passengers, to provide protection from the risk of spreading the COVID-19. The vaccination activities are prioritized for seafarers, loading and unloading workers, stevedoring workers, truck drivers, ship passengers, port workers, and the community around the ports. Some examples that of implementing technology-based are also encouraged to the shipping sector. For example, the shipping industry can make incremental changes to improve life at sea for seafarers. It is not about transforming the industry overnight, but making progressive improvement. For example, to increase digitalization use of faster port turnaround times, the need for human context is still essential to make seafarers feel connected while they are at sea for long period of time. Also, better connection and access to Wi-Fi on board the ship will help with loneliness and also provide access to e-learning module. In addition, lifestyles while on board is a contributing factor to the well-being of seafarers. Nurturing foods and having a positive and connected workforce will support greater happiness at sea. The digitalization we are seeing across the industry, we need to be ready to support seafarers who will need to be trained to use emerging new technologies. Experienced and talented people remain central to safe and effective industry progress, and it's important that the shipping industry is building a new e-learning platform and training procedures to support the change within the industry. Thank you, Michael, for the time given to us. Thank you also for Singapore for arranging this event. We all believe with the jargon, safety start with me, safety start with all of us with good collaboration. Thank you.
Pari, thank you very much. It's very encouraging to hear that. You talk about a few things, and really I think the key thing is that we're trying to transform and make sure that the crew is ready for the next level of change that's taking place. But Captain Andre, what about your viewpoint? As we ride the waves towards a greener future, what do you believe is the greatest challenge that we will face in the maritime industry on board today's modern merchant navy vessels? Park already talked about it before. What are your viewpoints on this?
Well, my feeling, the greatest challenge we're facing at the moment is a challenge of opportunity, opportunity particularly for cadets. We're seeing, and it's a global problem. Myself and the Nautical Institute and many of my colleagues were contacted regularly, or virtually on a daily basis, by cadets who have gained their qualifications, their academic qualifications,
yes,
and they cannot find a berth on a ship. And they're pleading with us. I was working with a young seafarer recently who said to me, sir, he said, please, can you help me find a ship? He said, I'm unable to do this from where I am. And also myself and my family are unable to pay the agent's fees to get myself on a ship. Now, how sad is that?
Yes.
When a cadet is actually considering going to his family or using his money to pay somebody to put him on a ship to get his sea time. And I'm going to make a personal plea here to those ship owners who are developing these dual fuel ships, these greener ships. And I commend you for what you're doing, and there's many of you in Singapore here. Please, you have invested millions and millions of dollars in these vessels. Can I ask you to invest just a little bit more, a very small amount in comparison, in the future of the seafarers on those vessels? And please, every vessel have at least 2 cadets on board at all times.
Yes.
These cadets on board, within the lifetime of that ship, are your captains, your chief engineers, your superintendents, your vessel operators, even your CEOs, within that lifetime of the ship. So make the investment in the future in those. They'll be trained on board your ships. And quite honestly, if you want the best trained operators of your vessels, train them yourselves. You're not going to get any better than that. If you do the training, you will have the best. My goodness. Thank you. But I do passionately believe this. We must give the opportunity to our young career professionals that are coming on after us. They are our future. They're going to be taking over from us. And that, I believe, is one of the greatest challenges we face today. But globally, we can solve it together.
Captain Andre, thanks so much for sharing it. I think all of us resonate with what you've mentioned before, the plea to ship owners to make sure that will take place, and that we should try to assure more berths for our cadets for it to happen. We're slightly running out of time, but what I want to do is to maybe have the system people put on the screen this very good question that we will ask the panel as we sum up today, okay? Can we have it on the screen, please, if we can get it done? And that is the one that says, if the panel were to choose between efforts towards digitalization or versus efforts in ensuring sustaining seafarers for making shipping their profession, what would it be? It's a trick, almost a trick question, right? So maybe I'll start with Dato. Sorry to put you on the chair on this.
I would say go for both, because digitalization can also be used for the upgrading, training of seafarers. This is something which we actually learned from the pandemic. It necessitated us to innovate.
Yes.
From the normal face-to-face training of seafarers to innovate, because during the pandemic we were not allowed to conduct lessons face-to-face. Therefore, we in the Marine Department, we engage with the Maritime Training Institutes on what would be the best method forward for us to continue training seafarers, because we see that this is a very important facet, of developing the skills sets of the seafarers. So after engaging, looking at the requirements of the STCW convention and all that, then we decided that we would go on board with the online training of seafarers. And this has actually been successfully conducted in many of our maritime training institutes. And also, not only on the training part, but also on the certification part, where we also develop the processes and the procedures for us to do the assessment of the trainees online. And this also we have managed to do it successfully. So I do not think that there should be this dividing line between digitalization as well as the needs of the seafarers, because we can actually amalgamate both those to come up with a successful program for the upskilling and also for the training of the seafarers.
Dato, thank you for sharing that. Can I maybe ask Lei Hun, I know that in Singapore there is this ongoing development at the training institutes in regards to virtual reality and everything else. Can you share with the audience on what's taking place at this point in time, complementing what Dato has mentioned before in terms of supplementing training on board?
So Dato say go with both. I would say do with both, because tomorrow I think some of you have signed up to go to this Center of Excellence for Maritime Safety. Similarly, I think I went down to visit and I was quite impressed, because what they do is they actually use data analytics and they actually use VR and AR to basically simulate situation on board the vessel, and actually they have a module on LNG handling. For example, if there's a leak LNG, how do you handle that? And that training can only improve if more trains in it, because it is a data self-generating model, and with the data that's being imputed into the system based on like 100, 1,000, 10,000 seafarers who have gone through that training, the more the software is better for the seafarers. So there is a way where you can integrate both. And I absolutely echo what Captain Andrea said. If we can come up with all this in Singapore, we're going to go 5G, we're going to do RAPA, we're going to do active anchorage monitoring, we're going to do remote. The only way we can do it is when you have the manpower to go in tandem with this. So training and resources must come together. And just to build on what Captain Andrea said, I mean, from the MPA side, we are really keen to work with companies to see how we can continue the work to map out future competencies. And since we are a crew change center, we want to see how we can actually use Singapore to sort of train seafarers on future competency when you do the stopover, or whether there's some certification, we can do it. And then we can go and seek support from IMO. So any companies who's out there who is on board with Captain Andrea, please come to MBA. I'm sure we'll be more, we have got some of the officers here. We'll be more than happy to take your contacts, and I'm sure we can work very well together to map out the future competency and start training people soon with our tripartite partners here.
All right, there you go. So as you hear, Lee Hoon mentioned about in regards to this way of doing things. So that was a question that the audience put out from that talks about whether if the panel were to choose between efforts between digitalization or efforts to ensuring sustaining seafarers or the shipping profession. I think you've heard it. They will go with both and they will run with both. And so with that, we're running out of time and we are ending the session. We want to thank all of you for posing your questions online. But at the same time, can you join me in also thanking the panelists, particularly also Pak Arif, who is joining us virtually online to staying us through this whole discussion that we have here. And please give a warm thank you to the panelists here.